Due Process, honored for 3 consecutive years with the Mid-Atlantic Emmy for Outstanding Talk Program Series.
Boys right there. Do they have passes?
When they're suspended, the other 2 do not have passes.
It is her job to keep watch on what's happening in school, to keep track of images from 57 cameras. Good strategy for safety in school, or an unfair intrusion into pupil privacy? Security cameras in the schools on this edition of Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process is made possible by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law. Additional funding is provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual.
You send your kids to school, you expect them to learn. You expect them to be safe. But at what cost? Is near constant video surveillance too high a price to pay? And will it change the bottom line when it comes to violence, vandalism, drugs, and even cutting class? New Jersey's largest school district is about to find out, and Sandy King is here with the details.
Raymond, so far it is just 3 high schools, but the Newark School District has visions of putting video surveillance in every high school and eventually every middle school too. And we're not just talking a couple of cameras. One school has 72 separate watch points, all feeding into a digital system that's supposed to spell greater security and safety for students and staff who know there is always someone watching.
Go to class, fellows. Go to class.
There are 10 security guards here at Malcolm X Shabazz High in Newark, but even those numbers are not enough to cover every hallway and stairwell and door.
It's a very difficult building to have someone there at all times.
So security here now takes a new high-tech approach.
And I will manually click through the security cameras. We have 56 cameras, just to make sure everything is clear.
And usually it is, but vandalism and violence are not unknown in these halls. So the 56 digital cameras here are always watching, with security monitoring what they see and reacting.
Come in, Robinson. Those 3 boys right there, do they have passes?
When they're suspended, the other 2 do not have passes.
Okay, take them to the administrator for that department of whatever class that is they belong in.
We're trying to be as proactive as we possibly can. And what we're looking to do, we're trying to provide a safe environment on the interior of the school as well as the exterior.
I'll go around and start locking up so I can get ready for the night so everything will be secure.
Security Chief Willie Freeman insists the effort is bringing a big payoff. And he says for the 1.5 years since the cameras were installed, he has the stats to prove it.
We've looked at vandalism and violence in the actual school go down in excess of 50%.
For some of the students, that means greater comfort.
It's good to have cameras in your school, see if you have sex, doing drugs, doing stuff like that.
I think they're good because people be starting finding stuff like that.
From what I understand, most of the kids accept it, and they accept it as a good measure of safety.
And now that we have the cameras, we never hardly get anyone in these back areas.
But asking Shabazz students sometimes brings a different response.
Yeah, I don't like the cameras because it seems like when we walk in, it seems like we criminals. We walking down the hall and they got the cameras on us, like every little thing we do.
And while the cameras are watching the kids at Shabazz and at Barringer, where a system has just been installed, the cameras themselves are being watched and critiqued.
The consequences of having the cameras is that students are in an atmosphere of distrust. They feel like they're being watched all the time. Big Brother is there, and I think it's not really a healthy atmosphere for learning.
But Big Brother is not in the classrooms nor the bathrooms, so the school board says privacy is just not an issue.
All the cameras that we have in our schools are all in open areas like corridors. We use them in cafeterias. We also use them in a gymnasium. These are locations which there are, in fact, no expectation of privacy.
If I wanted to see the front door, I would click on 18.
I feel like our privacy is being invaded, you know, because, you know, if they have enough security, they don't have to worry about having all these cameras and stuff.
For years, there have been guards and metal detectors here, but school officials say it's taken the cameras to complete an effective picture.
We have 3 cameras in the cafeteria, so you get 3 different shots. 1, 2, 3.
But the cameras are only as good as the monitoring, and that consists of just one guard constantly cycling through 56 separate camera images.
Click the mouse on a certain area, like this is the front door.
On a screen that may not always give a clear picture.
Come in, Watson.
Go ahead.
Where are those students going, the 2 that you just passed?
That's a custodian and a student.
Thank you.
What kind of message do we send to children if we're telling them that we want to watch them all the time and record their activities and take action based on what we see?
Well, a lot of people think that. However, when you ask the kids themselves, you will find out that probably within 2 weeks, the children actually forget that the cameras are actually in place. It becomes a normal part of the environment in school.
Cameras in the school, it's like a plus and a negative. It's a plus because you get to see what the wrong kids are doing and how they're tearing up, but it's also a negative because the privacy of the ones that's doing what they're supposed to do are being invaded also. Yeah. So it's like a pro and a con also at the same time.
And at what dollar cost, you may ask? Well, the cameras in the first 2 schools have so far cost the Newark District nothing, thanks to $300,000 plus in grants from Lucent and Panasonic. But 3 more Newark high schools will go on camera this year. That's likely to cost the district more than $500,000, and school officials say that once they've put the digital systems in each high school, they will be shooting for those middle schools next.
So has Newark found a high-tech solution to school violence? Will the rest of the state be following suit? And what about the psychological impact on kids who know they're being watched? We'll be looking for some answers from a panel of experts just 1 minute from now, so stay with us.
And I think the cameras is a good thing because they can catch the people that's in the hallway doing stuff and make sure they go to class. It's all right because it's protecting the school system.
Protecting you too?
Mm-hmm.
It's safe, make it safe.
I think the cameras do a good job, but certain things don't get picked up on camera.
It's good to have cameras in your school, see if you having sex, doing drugs, doing stuff like that.
I think it's an even better idea is cameras in the staircases, because that's where most of the activity that goes on in the school happens. I think it's a good idea so that teachers are accountable for their actions and students are accountable for their actions. We can see it on tape. Yeah. There's nothing better.
Are school surveillance cameras a good idea? Are they effective? Or do they violate some basic rights to privacy? Grayson Barber, a cooperating attorney for the ACLU and a privacy advocate, says it looks too much like Big Brother to her. But Marion Bolden, the superintendent of Newark schools, says it's just employing new technology in the interest of prudent school policy. Welcome to both of you. Let me start with you, Superintendent, since it's your action that we're interested in. What prompted this? Why are you doing it, and why now?
Well, certainly the issue for us is to provide a safe environment for our youngsters. That's first and foremost. We do employ other strategies other than surveillance systems to guarantee and ensure youngster safety. But given today's world and having surveillance systems, it's just an added precautionary measure that we have found, for the most part, to be fairly well received, and even by youngsters. So, you know, when you look at the fact that we have many, many entrances to our buildings, Having surveillance systems helps us in terms of the intruders who come in and go out. It's not just the youngsters in the corridors that we're trying to have oversight over, but it certainly is part of what we're trying to accomplish.
Grayson Barber, it sounds like the superintendent is describing apple pie. What could possibly be wrong?
Well, I certainly sympathize with the superintendent's concerns, and I think it's important to look at the goals of creating an environment in a high school where students can learn effectively. One is that you need a safe environment, another is that you want to inculcate values, and a third is that you want to enable these high school students to become responsible adults. And my question is whether surveillance cameras actually accomplish these goals. It appears from the data that I've seen that cameras are in fact not a particularly effective tool for avoiding violence. For example, I think we've all seen photos of school shootings where the photos themselves came from surveillance cameras. So the surveillance cameras and their presence didn't actually stop violence from occurring in those schools. Another problem...
Let me just stop for a moment, because Grayson Barber suggested to begin with that these are not a particularly effective security tool. And indeed, Newark's numbers, at least if we look at the statistics, don't suggest a crime wave or a great upsurge in violence or vandalism in Newark schools.
Right. Could I respond?
Sure.
Simply because surveillance cameras have never been intended to change the moral character of youngsters. We have a separate goal that addresses that, and having youngsters who are morally responsible is first and foremost, even beyond surveillance cameras. So we have character education, we have programs like Do Something, Best Friends, because it is very important that youngsters have a moral sense of responsibility as well. But surveillance cameras also provide a sense of safety. And it's not necessarily youngsters being fearful of one another. We do have an issue of crime in the district, and it's not so pervasive that it's front page anymore. We've done an awful lot to curb crime. But when you talk about vandalism and you talk about writing on the walls and you talk about youngsters, and not many of them, but enough of them that pull fire alarms, it serves as a deterrent. And I don't think that there's an issue of maybe I need to be very careful in what I say. There hasn't been an outcry of you're violating issues of privacy in the district. In fact, just the contrary has existed. Parents have come to advisory board meetings and said, when are you going to get the surveillance systems up in place in our schools? And we've been fortunate in as much as we've been able to partner with some corporations that have helped us fast forward what it is that we're trying to do.
Grayson Barber, the fact that some parents or large numbers of parents have come forward and said we like it on balance, does that eliminate privacy concerns?
Oh, certainly not. I mean, I want to go back to the question of whether cameras actually work in practice in reducing violence in schools. And then I think we need to talk about the chilling effect that surveillance has on these students. It's well known that if you put people under scrutiny and put them under surveillance, that they will actually change their behavior. And perhaps that's part of what the school system wants to accomplish. But it also suppresses creativity, it suppresses innovation because it puts pressure on students to conform. And that's where my principles come in as a constitutional attorney, because we have a constitutional right to form associations, to form friendships, to dissent, and to be nonconformists for the purpose of creativity.
Do you think that there is a potentially viable constitutional challenge to the kind of steps Newark is taking with these cameras?
In schools, students have constitutional rights, but the constitutional rights are limited by the concerns that the superintendent really legitimately has to address.
Sounds like it's possible, but a tough case.
It's a tough case. Students have a constitutional right to decline to salute the flag, for example. And students have a constitutional right to read books and do their homework and to form their opinions. But they do not have a constitutional right to be free of all searches of their lockers because of safety issues.
Let me go back to you, Superintendent. Do you see any downside in terms of a possible, a negative inhibiting effect? That is there any concern at all that you see with these cameras, or do you think it's 100% upside without any potential chilling effect?
Well, I haven't heard internally issues of invasion of privacy. Today is really the first conversation that I've engaged around this issue. For us, it has been relief on the part of some of the principals. And again, when I talk about surveillance systems that have been put in place in Newark, very often it's surveillance systems that are looking at the perimeter of the building. We have a lot of issues with graffiti, we have vandalism, we have theft. And where you say that there has been no direct impact, I beg to differ.
Well, my only question is, though, because you've talked about what you view as the positives. Obviously,
right.
For example, you've chosen not to have cameras in classrooms or in bathrooms. And I can recall that sometimes in school there are allegations that things take place in bathrooms that can't be done in the hallways. You've obviously made a judgment that some areas remain areas off. So that would suggest that you think there are limits to the utility of cameras and maybe a downside. So the only question I wanted to get at was whether, in your judgment, there was any downside in terms of the inhibitory suggestion that Grayson Barber made earlier.
Well, right, because I don't disagree totally, because certainly there is an issue of privacy. You would not even think of putting a surveillance system in a boys' or girls' bathroom and in areas that are private.
But don't things take place in bathrooms besides the normal ones?
Yes, but there is where you said there's a dividing line in terms of what it is that's appropriate and what's not appropriate. I mean, there would be no question that what goes on in girls' and boys' bathrooms are things smoking, perhaps, but that's something that I don't feel that we have the right, as was stated by the other participant in our conversation, that there's some things that you can do and some things that you can't.
What was the judgment that you made not to do classrooms? What was that analysis?
In a classroom where a teacher wants to feel free to say and do the things that she wants to do, they might feel inhibited by cameras in there. There are some teachers who would not have a problem with it. I mean, we do tape lessons and the like, but I don't think the purpose of the surveillance for us was to put it inside of a classroom or inside of a bathroom. The issues that you deal with in schools in general, and I don't even want to say just in urban schools, but there are things that the technology has allowed us to monitor in a way that makes our youngsters feel safe, makes our teachers feel safe. We have surveillance systems around our parking lot because very often they're vandalized for reasons of theft. And what it's done in our district, in my opinion, and I think it would be something that others would agree with, there's a sense of comfort that comes with having surveillance systems.
We heard one little girl in the video that we showed at the top of the show that Sandy King had prepared in the Newark schools say that she thought it made them feel like criminals. Do you think that the possible message being sent to especially inner city kids, which is a message they hear in a lot of other places, that somehow they're different from others in a lesser way, is reinforced by cameras in the hallways in their schools?
No, and it's unfortunate that with this young lady and any other students that feel that way, that there hasn't been conversations directly to them as to why the cameras are there. I think when people understand why the cameras are there, it's not to suggest that youngsters are criminal, on the contrary. And so there also needs to be the issue of awareness in terms of why would we resort to using cameras today as opposed to not using cameras. And I think
I'd like to respond to that because for normal adults, surveillance cameras and telephone wiretapping and bugging devices would never be tolerated unless there was some kind of suspicion of wrongdoing. You know, before an adult can be surveyed by any government actor, the government actor has to get a court order, and the court order cannot be obtained unless there's some kind of reasonable suspicion of wrongdoing. And in this case, when you're having video surveillance of everybody, you're treating good actors and bad actors all as if they were potential criminals. Also, I think that there are some studies out of, well, there's a famous whistleblower case out of Brooklyn that showed that footage from video surveillance cameras in intersections were disproportionately trained on breast shots and buttocks because apparently that was what was interesting to catch on the video. And there's a very interesting study out of England by a researcher named Simon Davies that showed that video cameras mounted in public places at intersections in public parks were disproportionately trained on people of color, undesirables, and women. So there is a strong undercurrent of racism and voyeurism by the mere presence of the video cameras themselves.
Let's assume, for example, that you have a universe which is largely consisting of students of color. within that population, and assuming also that there aren't breast shots or buttock shots, at least that anybody's noticed thus far, is there still a possible stigmatizing effect that concerns you?
Oh, certainly, because video surveillance necessarily implies a suspicion of wrongdoing at all times and all places. And what people will do when they're being scrutinized is they will change their conduct. They'll move the bad conduct off camera, making the bathrooms arguably a less safe place, and making sure that their behavior in front of the camera conforms to the expectations of the authorities.
Superintendent, we understand that the district got some money from Lucent and from another firm that helped put this together. Was the idea born before the money, or did the money suggest the possibility of putting this kind of technology to this use?
No, I think the need surfaced before the money became available. And what happened in the course of conversation, Lucent Technology said that they would help us fund Malcolm X Shabazz, and then sometime after that, Panasonic offered to do the same for Barringer High School.
To the extent
I think
that
even without the funding from outside sources, we would have looked to have at least a smaller version, perhaps, of that surveillance system in place, and strategic places, at least in the school itself.
But at a certain point, you have to make judgments about budget that involve allocating monies here that you could also conceivably use for teaching purposes, even using technology for teaching.
Yes, that's true. I don't want to get into a conversation about Abbott funds, or because that's not the main focus here. But part of what we are charged to do as Abbott districts and superintendents is to provide a safe environment and to put programs in place and equipment in place that helps ensure that.
But we are talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, large chunks of funding that are going to be used for this, as opposed to other pedagogical uses.
Right, but we have surveillance systems in some of our elementary schools that cost $9,000. There's 7 or 8 cameras. They're pretty much focused on entrances and.
But when this is finished, what do you think the total expenditures will be?
Oh, I don't know. It could be. Well, it's going to be well over $1 million, but I have to look at what I get as a result of that investment. And if, you know, the youngsters feel safer, the parents feel safer, and to some degree that is what has been the positive effect, then it's more than worth that. We also have programs, I've said, that also deal with the issue of safety. But surveillance cameras serve a purpose today. We are not trying to deal with issues of invading people's privacy. They are only in common areas, where my question would be, you know, if you're going down a corridor from one classroom to the other, why then is there such a big issue that a surveillance camera is stationed there?
You have some background in psychology in addition to being a lawyer. What do you think is the potential harm? The superintendent put it pretty clearly.
Well, I don't mean to downplay the concerns that the superintendent has, and they are certainly very legitimate. But the reason for protecting privacy in America is to further the constitutional rights of free association, free expression, and all of these are compromised by surveillance. If we want to maintain American values like innovation and the idea that good ideas will prevail if they're allowed to be expressed, then you have to give people the leeway to express themselves, to form associations, and all of these can be potentially compromised by surveillance. I have a comment, if we have a moment, regarding expenditures. The city of Miami spent a lot of money during the Super Bowl to put surveillance cameras to do biometric scans of faces of 100,000 people who attended the Super Bowl. And the company that provided the surveillance systems made a lot of money. The idea was to match the faces of the people attending the Super Bowl against a database of terrorists and known criminals. Well, they didn't find any terrorists. They found, I think, 1 ticket scalper and maybe a few pickpockets. But a lot of money was spent. All of the people attending the Super Bowl were treated as potential criminals, and yet it didn't serve the purpose of making the Super Bowl a safer place. And I think the bottom line should be whether the surveillance cameras actually serve the purpose of making the schools a safer place, and I think we need to gather some evidence of that.
As we wind down, Superintendent, is this the beginning of an expansion of this kind of expenditure and camera use in New Jersey, in inner city schools or throughout the country, or do you think this is a unique situation?
I think that it is the beginning of another tool that we can use to provide a safe environment in the schools. I think that you have to weigh all of the issues when it comes to what it is we're trying to achieve. And the expense, and I don't think that it's extravagant, is certainly worth the investment to have another level of safeguard.
It looks like we'll have to come back to see how it expands.
Okay.
Yes or no, do you agree that we're going to have an expansion of this around the country?
I think we're going to have an expansion, and I think it's a terrible
Have to have
thing.
you both back again then to talk about that expansion, because that's it for this edition. You'll want to join us next week when we return with still another issue of law, social justice, and of course, due process. Until then, for Sandy King and all of us here, I'm Raymond Brown. Thanks for watching.
Check the area of room 317. Robinson, you see that young man that you just passed? Those 3 boys right there?
Affirmative.
Do they have passes?
They're suspended. The other 2 do not have passes.
Okay, take them to the administrator for that department of whatever class that is they belong in. So Mr. Robinson is going to take those boys to whatever administrator it is for the class that they belong in. That's on the 3rd floor, new building.
Major funding for Due Process was made possible by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law. Additional funding was provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual,